Hey, welcome everybody. Welcome to End Times Bible Study. My name is Diane, and this is an in-person weekly Bible study that meets, and we live stream through Facebook, and then it's posted to YouTube the next day. So normally we have some other people here. At the moment, I'm here by myself. We don't have anybody at our study. I think a couple people are coming, should be coming in any minute, so just running a little bit late. But anyways, we will get started, and we appreciate everybody who's tuning in, either now or later. Oh, here's one of them. Hey, come on in. I just started, so just grab an outline. You can sit right there. Yeah, because I don't think Anne's going to make it, and Dean's out tonight. So. I don't know. She didn't seem to think she was. So, but we already started, so we're live streaming. So, yeah. So, and here's Bo too. So, hey, come on in. We've already started the live stream. So I'm just going to go ahead and pray, and we will start the lesson. So, Father, we're so thankful and grateful for everything that you've given us and all that you've done for us, and thank you for our salvation and for your word. And I pray that for the power and the presence of the Holy Spirit to be here tonight, just that you would open our minds and lead us into all truth and righteousness, and help us to really understand what these prophecies in Daniel are saying and how this impacts our lives. And we ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, thanks everybody. So you have anybody needs a drink or whatnot, y'all help yourselves. Okay, so just a brief recap. This is Daniel chapter 8, part 2. So we are going to be covering verses 17 through 27 tonight, and this is Daniel's vision of the ram and the goat. So at the time of this, it's the third year of Belshazzar's reign, which would put it at 551 BC, according to the Babylonian Chronicle. So Daniel is at least 69 at this point. That's assuming an age of 13 when he was taken into exile into Babylon from Jerusalem. We don't really know the age, so it's just a guesstimate. But like chapter 7, which was also a dream/vision that Daniel had, chapter 8, both of those chapters occur chronologically between chapters 4 and 5. If you recall, chapter 4 was the last we saw of King Nebuchadnezzar, and then chapter 5 picks up with King Belshazzar, and it's the night of when the kingdom fell into the hands of the Medo-Persians. So anyways, we saw last week that the ram is identified as Medo-Persia, and the goat is Greece, and that was actually identified by the angel who interprets the vision for Daniel. So there's really no question about that. So the main controversy really centers on who is the identity of the little horn. And so we talked a lot last week about Antiochus Epiphanes, and he was one of the kings in the Seleucid Empire that developed after Alexander the Great. His empire was broken into 4 regions, and that was one of them. And so some people say, well, this whole thing's already been completely fulfilled by Antiochus. Others say, okay, yeah, it was fulfilled by Antiochus, but it's also foreshadowing the Antichrist. And then I came across another theory in between last week and this week that I added in, and I found some really interesting information, some articles I found online that had just been published like in the past couple weeks. They have very interesting info, and we're going to get to that. But this latest article is basically saying that this is all like future, that the little horn in this chapter is the Antichrist. That Antiochus Epiphanes did not fulfill everything here, and that it actually will be fulfilled later on by the Antichrist. So we'll talk about that in more detail. But what I think we'll do, we already read the full chapter last week, but I think I'm going to just read it like verses. We wanted to go into a little bit more detail on the 2300 days, and I did more research on that, and so I think we'll just reread it. I'll make a few comments as we go, and we'll read it down to the 2300 evenings, which is actually verse 14, and then we'll pause. So all right, so this is in the third year of the reign of King Belshazzar. a vision appeared to me, Daniel, subsequent to the one that had appeared to me earlier. So if you recall, chapter 7 was the first year of Belshazzar. So now this is like, I don't know how you exactly count it's 2 or 3 years later, because it's in the third year of Belshazzar. And the chapter 7 was a whole prophecy about the 4 beasts, which correlated to the image Nebuchadnezzar, his dream that was in chapter 2 of the statues. So those were Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and the Roman Empire. And so chapter 7 expounded more on that, and it seemed to definitely be talking about a little horn in chapter 7 was the Antichrist. All right, so he goes on to say, and in the vision I saw myself in the citadel of Susa in the province of Elam. I saw in the vision that I was beside the Ulai Canal. Then I lifted up my eyes and saw a ram, so that's Media Persia, with 2 horns standing beside the canal. The horns were long, but one was longer than the other, and the longer one grew up later. So that clearly correlates with Persia conquering the Medes. They merged together, but Persia was always kind of the more dominant empire, and so they're the longer horn. Let's see, in verse 4, I saw the ram charging toward the west and the north and the south. No animal could stand against him, and there was no deliverance from his power. He did as he pleased and became great. As I was contemplating all this, suddenly a goat with a prominent horn between his eyes came out of the west, crossing the surface of the entire earth without touching the ground. And that's correlating with Greece as the goat, and the horn seems to be Alexander the Great, who conquered with incredible speed and ferocity that was kind of unmatched. So in verse 6, he came toward the 2-horned ram I had seen standing beside the canal and rushed at him with furious power. I saw him approach the ram in a rage against him, and he struck the ram and shattered his 2 horns. The ram was powerless to stand against him, and the goat threw him to the ground and trampled him, and no one could deliver the ram from his power. Thus the goat, i.e. Greece, became very great. But at the height of his power, his large horn was broken off, and 4 prominent horns came up in its place, pointing toward the 4 winds of heaven. So that appears that it's, Alexander the Great, the horn was broken at the height of his power. He was only 32 when he unexpectedly died, and then it took, I think, like 20 years to finally parcel out the empire into the 4 kingdoms that it became. So that's all pretty straightforward in terms of the known history correlating with this. So I don't think there's a whole lot of disagreement that this was fulfilled. And in fact, it's so accurate. There's all these people that have said, the skeptics, oh, well, Daniel must have written this after these events because this is so accurate they can't conceive that God could actually have given this, that God actually knows the beginning from the end and gave this prophecy because of its accuracy. All right, so now we get to the little horn in verse 9. From one of these horns, a little horn emerged and grew extensively toward the south and east and toward the beautiful land. So again, these are talking about areas of conquest, which seems to correlate, with Antiochus, is what it was like last time. It grew as high as the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the host and some of the stars to earth and trampled them. So that's where if you're talking about like angelic beings or, did Antiochus really do that? Because it magnified itself even to the prince of the host, who would be Jesus. So, so this guy, Mark Becker, who wrote these, I linked the 2 internet articles in the references, and I'll put it in the description box if you're on YouTube. But he had 2 articles we were going to cover, just some excerpts from it, but I would recommend going back and reading them, both articles in detail. But his first one was Daniel 8, Antiochus or Antichrist by Mark Becker. That was just published in April 22nd, 2023, so it's pretty recent. But he was saying that basically Antiochus, all right, so he's saying the host and the stars are referencing to and symbolic of angels, and the host as well would include the armies of heaven. So his point is, if Antiochus is a pagan king, how would he have any fundamentally intimate knowledge of God, of creation, and the nation and people of Israel, his heavenly abode, and his heavenly angels? Answer, he would not. And then when it talked about, like with, Jesus being the prince of the host, again, how would he really understand who Jesus, the Son of God, was at that point in time? So, that was interesting. And he had some other points, like Antiochus evidently declared himself to be an incarnation of Zeus. And we know that Antiochus Epiphanes, he gave himself that name. That was not his name at birth, and it meant God manifest. So he was definitely promoting himself as a god. But did he magnify himself even to the Prince of Hosts? Whereas we'll see as we go through this, and we know from the Revelation study, the Antichrist specifically challenges Jesus face to face. The Revelation 19, the forces of the Antichrist are gathered for the Battle of Armageddon, and Jesus comes back and completely wipes them out. And we'll look at that in more detail. But anyway, so those were some interesting points from that article. But back to the text, it magnified itself even to the Prince of Hosts, which is Jesus. It removed his daily sacrifice and overthrew the place of his sanctuary. And Antiochus did remove the daily sacrifice out of the temple. Now, when it says overthrew the place of his sanctuary, I don't know, that might be more the Antichrist. And in the rebellion, the host and the daily sacrifice were given over to the horn, and it flung truth to the ground and prospered in whatever it did. Then verse 13, then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to him, how long until the fulfillment of the vision of the daily sacrifice, the rebellion that causes desolation, and the surrender of the sanctuary and of the host to be trampled? He said to me, it will take 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary will be properly restored. So we did talk about this last week. We didn't really have a good conclusion, and I wanted to do more research on it, which I did. So there's so many different opinions, so we can't really say for certainty. Like the Walvoord commentary I use, he feels like this 2,300 day prophecy has already been fulfilled, and we don't need to worry about it anymore. The guy who wrote The Coming Prince, which is talking about the Antichrist, Sir Robert Anderson, he thinks this is still a future prophecy. So two of my main sources that I use for the study have completely conflicting opinions. Now, I found this article from Mark Becker, and he provided some very interesting options. But the one that Walvoord mentioned was just that, like, if this was fulfilled in the time of Antiochus. So Antiochus died in 164 BC. So if you start with that date and count backward 2,300 days, you arrive at 171 BC, in which year Onias III, the legitimate high priest, was murdered and a pseudo line of priests assumed power. It says this could fit with the 2,300 days, although the temple was not actually desecrated until, weird date, December 25th of 167 BC. So, I don't know, I wasn't really fully satisfied with that as an explanation, because to me nothing has shown the actual dates that it's exactly 2,300 days. It's just saying, okay, the same year, it gets you to the same year, but really where's the evidence of the actual days? Because the days are significant, and it can't just be close to it. It either is 2,300 or it's not. So I still felt like it was more, I'm like, well, I felt like even if it was fulfilled back then, which I haven't seen the actual evidence, all of this is really pointing to the Antichrist in general. So I felt like even there's a partial fulfillment of this chapter back then, we're still looking for a future fulfillment, which I think does fit the evidence better, as we'll see through the lesson. So anyways, in the one article by Mark Becker, he's saying that All right, the 7-year tribulation is going to be 2,520 days. And we know that for sure because Revelation constantly gives either like 3.5 years or 42 months, or I forget the exact, it'll list the actual days. And we know the 7, that is based on the Daniel 9:27 prophecy. The final 7 for Israel said 7 years. So, we can know the number of days for the actual tribulation. So you subtract 2,300 from that number, you get 220 days. So if you assume that the tribulation starts, Daniel 9:27, and we can look over there, we'll do this chapter next week. It'll probably take us 2 weeks because this is a lot in this chapter. But in 27, it says, and he will confirm, and he was referring to the Antichrist. He will confirm a covenant with many for 1 7-year period. But in the middle of the 7-year period, so 3.5 years in, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering, and on the wing of the temple will come the abomination that causes desolation until the decreed destruction is poured out upon him. So there's a lot packed into just a few verses in Daniel. Did you have you have to think about that? Well, if it seems like a lot, don't worry, because we'll go into this in much more detail next week when we start chapter 9. And you'll see, because we will be able to count, there's all these things about, okay, when this happens, it'll be this many days, and we can actually look back historically and find those exact dates and count the days. And based on the prophecies, you could even predict exactly when Jesus would come, and it all fits. So that's, to me, that's like probably the coolest prophecy in the whole Bible, the way all that works out. So we will look at that in more detail. But anyways, he's just basically saying that, okay, the tribulation starts, there's this covenant made with the many, which to me seems likely would include Israel being a part of it. It never really says Israel, but I mean, this is all about Israel. The final 7-year period is prescribed for Israel. So since they will be a part of the covenant, and I think it probably will either it's just about them rebuilding their temple, or that's part of it. Because, we know that there has to be a rebuilt third temple in order for these prophecies to be fulfilled. And just, and again, if that seems impossible, remember, Israel has everything ready to go. They have been working on this. They have all the plans ready, all the art, all the stuff for their temple ready. They just need like a go ahead to put their plans in motion. Well, that's the problem, is because the Muslim Dome of the Rock is that gold dome thing you see, and that's where they want to build. So and there's so much tension over there between Muslims and Jews and whatnot. So it seems like an impossibility that this could ever be built. But remember, Israel did not exist for almost 2,000 years as a nation, and it seemed unlikely they would come back as a nation. And they came back in 1948. So, we can look at these things, and even if we're not sure how it can play out, or it seems impossible, it's like it can happen for sure. So anyways, assuming that they say they get their temple up and running in 220 days after they sign the covenant. So that would equate with Israel offering sacrifices for 1,040 days before the Antichrist commits the abomination that causes desolation, which we know occurs at the midpoint of the tribulation. There are so that's how he's getting to the 2,300 days, because you could, say, all right, we know it starts here.
This is the one that you just read.
Yeah, this is the Mark Becker, and now this one is actually called Daniel 8, 10 through 14, and Daniel 12, 11 through 12, the 2,300 days. So the references, it's on your outline on the back, the references. But this one, so he also has 2 other ways where he works in where the 2,300 days could work, but they apply to Daniel 12. So I'm going to just say, because this is kind of, it gets kind of detailed. Maybe we'll circle back to those when we get to Daniel 12. But that's how he comes up with a 2,300 days, because he's like, okay, they get the temple up and running. 2,300 days later, finally the tribulation comes to an end. And he has more stuff in there too about, I kind of forgot that on the outline, because he's also talks about, well, how do we know, what does it mean when it says the sanctuary will be properly restored in verse 14? And he's like, does that mean that it's the temple being cleansed might refer to the destruction of the temple? And he thinks it's possible because there's a Zechariah 14:4 prophecy that says when Jesus returns, he will stand on the Mount of Olives, which will split in two. And so there's going to be this huge upheaval. And he thinks that could just cause the destruction of the third temple at that point. Because this is not a temple God ever wanted built. I mean, technically Jesus already paid for so this isn't like God's idea for a temple, it's man's idea. Although there will be a millennial temple that will exist, and that's described in Ezekiel 40 through 48. But anyways, so is it like the destruction of the temple? Is it the cleanup and debris removal of the destroyed temple? Or is it Jesus establishing the millennial temple? So those are all kind of things he took into account with trying to figure this out. But he's basically saying, so that's how the 2,300 days would fit into this 7-year period, since it's not quite 7 years. So does that make sense? Questions, comments? Okay. All right. So yeah, go look at that article, and if it'll give more detail too. But yeah, so both of his other two theories were essentially using the 2,300 days to calculate when Israel will have their temple up and running, and the times they give they're both similar to his number one that we just covered. So, all right. So, we'll just have to see how it all plays out, I guess, at the end of the day. Can't really say for certain. There's a lot of opinions on that. So, all right. So down in verse 15, he says, while I, Daniel, was watching the vision and trying to understand it, there stood before me one having the appearance of a man. And I heard the voice of a man calling from between the banks of the Ulai, Gabriel, explain the vision to this man. As he came near to where I stood, I was terrified and fell face down. And we're going to see this again in Daniel chapter 10, verses 8 through 9, where he has a similar thing, another vision in chapter 10. And so he sees this vision, and he's with some other people. They don't see it, but they're terrified, and they run off and hide. It's in verse 7. And then in verse 8, so I was left alone gazing at this great vision. No strength remained in me. My face grew deathly pale, and I was powerless. I heard the sound of his words, and as I listened, I fell into a deep sleep with my face to the ground. So it sounds like he basically passed out, which is, what it sounds like here, because in verse 17, can I help you?
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, somebody came to the door. Okay, so anyways, back to verse 17, he says, Son of man, he said to me, understand that the vision concerns the time of the end. So that's important because, again, we're trying to place when did this happen? Was this Antiochus Epiphanes? Or is this at the very end, the end times? And Antiochus Epiphanes was actually, how would you define time of the end for the Seleucid Empire, or really the Grecian Empire? Because when he was reigning, there was still like 100 more years before Greece fell. And there was I think about 9 kings. Yeah, and there was about 9 kings after Antiochus. Yeah, help yourself. If you need a drink, Lois, go grab some out of the fridge. Okay.
Did you hear anything about some of the AIs might be the Antichrist?
Oh, the AIs could be the Antichrist. Yeah, I have heard stuff about that, and I'm still kind of struggling with that, because if we look at, since you asked that question, let's flip over to Revelation 13, where it talks about what happens. Let's see. Well, the thing is, I think AI could, that I wouldn't be surprised if technology couldn't accomplish something like that. But to me, if technology did accomplish it, then it would be like, well, that was just technology.
Right.
It's almost like, well, so what then? But I mean, when you look, we see that, okay, we have the beast from the sea, which is the Antichrist in chapter 13 of Revelation. Then the beast from the earth, which is the false prophet. And then I saw another beast rising out of the earth. The beast had 2 horns like a lamb, but spoke like a dragon. And this beast exercised all the authority of the first beast and caused the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast whose mortal wound had been healed. And the second beast performed great signs to cause even fire from heaven to come down to the earth in the presence of the people. Because of the signs it was given to perform on behalf of the first beast, it deceived those who dwell on the earth, telling them to make an image to the beast that had been wounded by the sword and yet had lived. The second beast was permitted to give breath to the image of the first beast, so that the image could speak, and caused all who refused to worship it to be killed. So, I mean, AI seems plausible. But, again, it's almost like, is that what it's talking about? I don't know. Any other thoughts about what you think? Nobody knows. I mean,
You hear it, but could that be?
right,
Possible.
right. It does, yeah. I mean, because the image could speak and cause all who refuse to worship it to be killed. So, how would that work out?
Only one of a kind. I'm different from you. Jesus was divine, and it's just so way out there. It seems like the AI. It seems like it's real robotic.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, definitely I will say the technology is all pretty much there. It's all lining up. I mean, what is needed to fulfill these prophecies? I mean, even then, requiring a mark, to receive a mark on their right hand or their forehead, so no one could buy or sell unless he had the mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of its name. Here is a call for wisdom. Let the one who has insight calculate the number of the beast, for it's the number of a man, and that number is 666. So, I mean, we can see with all this central digital banking and all these different things that are coming along, and even the technology where they already, in doing chips, or even, we saw that when we did the Revelation study, there's even it almost looks like a kind of a tattoo, but it was actually on your skin, and it was on your hand. And so they have the technology already, I think, so it's just a matter of, that's going to be a pretty big undertaking, I would think, to do that to everybody in the world. So, but at any rate, we can see that these things are lining up, and that's why it's important to study this, so we actually know, because there's so much misinformation out there on what's going to happen, or people who think that tribulation has already started. But we know from the Bible it hasn't, because we see the first seal, when the seals start to get broken in Revelation chapter 6, that's the white horse that rides, and it's the Antichrist. He's looking like a good guy who's going to come in, but he's going to be evil. And then we see from Daniel 9:27 also confirming the treaty, or confirming a covenant with many. So when we see that event, that's when we will know if we're still here. Depends if we're raptured out ahead of time, or if we're not and we're here and we see it, then we will know that is when it has started. So it has not actually started yet. And and there was a thing, I was annoyed about this a couple weeks ago, because Trump gave that speech and he said the seal has been broken. And then all these people started coming out on Twitter saying, oh, the first seal has been broken. Oh, the third seal has been broken. Oh, the sixth seal has been broken. And it's like, oh my gosh, none of these seals have been broken yet. And we've got to... What's that? Well, I think Trump was probably referring more to just, I don't think he was talking about Revelation, but people people started saying it was, I think he was basically saying like, if you can do this, if they can do this to me, they can do it to anybody. And it's like, this is kind of like an off limit sort of thing that they've done to him. And now it's like, well, that opens the floodgates. I think that's what he was saying. But anyways, that's all kind of a diversion. So getting back to this, so Daniel, it says, while he was speaking with me, I fell into a deep sleep with my face to the ground. So it sounds also like chapter 10. Like basically it sounds like he passes out, he's like really overwhelmed and terrified. Then he touched me, helped me to my feet, and said, behold, I will make known to you what will happen in the latter time of wrath, because it concerns the appointed time of the end. So 3 times now he has said it's the time of the end. And then when you talk about the latter time of wrath, what is the tribulation except God pouring out his judgment and wrath on the earth during that 7-year period? So it's like, okay, that seems to be really correlating there. I think the thing that gets tough is just because, you've got like, okay, we've got the 2, like it feels like it jumps, like you're talking about something that could be Antiochus Epiphanes or under the Grecian Empire, but then all of a sudden it's like, wait a second, it's actually now like we've just missed out on several thousand years of history, more than 2,000. Like this was, 5 something BC when all this was happening with Daniel in Babylon, or around 600 BC. But anyways, so you're talking about quite a gap in time. But back to verse 20, the 2-horned ram that you saw represents the kings of Media and Persia. The shaggy goat represents the king of Greece, and the large horn between his eyes is the first king, i.e. Alexander the Great. So that was all, basically the angel specified that. The 4 horns that replace the broken one represent the 4 kingdoms that will rise from the nation, but will not have the same power. So again, the 4 empires it was divided into. Now in verse 23, is this Antichrist or is this Antiochus Epiphanes? Or is it kind of both, where it's, Antiochus Epiphanes fits a lot of it and is kind of foreshadowing the Antichrist. In the latter part of their reign, when the rebellion has reached its full measure, an insolent king skilled in intrigue will come to the throne. All right, so back to the outline. Let's see here. So Antiochus was a Seleucid ruler, and the area covered Mesopotamia in modern-day Iraq with the Euphrates and Tigris rivers, and is also the location of the land of Shinar, which is Babylon, where the Antichrist will locate his Babel/Babylon kingdom during the Great Tribulation. And it appears that the Antichrist will arise from the area formerly known as the Seleucid kingdom. So it's like if it's like kind of like a correlation between these two. I mean, it seems to be making a big point of Antiochus, how he ties in to the Antichrist. So I'm like, well, that's interesting. So is the Antichrist actually coming from the former Seleucid kingdom? Which, eventually then that was all conquered by Rome, and we know there's a revised Roman Empire at the end, and the Antichrist comes out of that. But I don't know, that was interesting, and I was trying to look. I mean, again, this map, I was trying to do a better map, and it's just hard to get something to print out that's large enough. But the yellow is the Seleucid Empire. And I'm sorry for people watching, it's like backwards for you, but I mean, you're basically looking at like Turkey's up here, and then you have like Syria and Iraq and Iran, and so this might be a little bit easier because we have then and now, but let's look at the now one, because it seems like it would have comprised, it didn't necessarily look like all of Turkey, but at least part of Turkey, Syria, Iraq, Iran, it had Afghanistan and Kuwait, and it said part of Turkmenistan, which honestly I don't know where that is. These are just like former USSR ones. So I'm assuming in either one of those, because I don't know which one where that is exactly. And it's interesting because I'm like, well, who was covering Saudi Arabia? Because according to this map, it doesn't look like Saudi Arabia was even part of any of those empires under Greece. And like the Ptolemy Empire was like Egypt, and we'll see this when we get into Daniel 11, they have a lot of stuff on the king of the north, which is the Seleucid rulers, in this area, Syria and so forth. And they were, it seemed like there was a lot of fighting and problems between the king of the north and the king of the south, who was the Ptolemy Empire, which was down here mainly in Egypt. It didn't seem to be as extensive according to this map, but I'll pass this map around again, but I'm like, well, again, that seems kind of like, gee, would the Antichrist really be from those, like Iran and Iraq and Turkey? They seem like unlikely countries. Or is it because it was a Grecian empire? Does that somehow tie into Greece? Or just the Roman Empire in general, like any country that was part of the Roman Empire could be where the Antichrist comes. So I thought that was an interesting question. And, again, that kind of negates, like, some of these people who are like, oh, Trump is the Antichrist. Well, or Elon Musk is the Antichrist. It's like Elon Musk, I think, isn't he from South Africa? And I mean, Trump is like, I don't know. He's American. I'm just saying people will come up with all these things on who they think the Antichrist is, but it's like, well,
There's many antichrists as far as anti-Christian.
yeah, there's a lot of the spirit of Antichrist is out there, but the question is, we're talking about the Antichrist, and these people are literally saying, like, speculating that, these people could be the Antichrist. So, but again, knowing
They said that about Obama.
yeah, they said that about Obama, and again, it didn't seem like he would have had the right lineage either for it, because if he was born in Kenya, if that was the case, the birther in me comes out. But anyways, also it seems like, again, I do believe in, a lot of people are like, oh, America's Babylon, and it's like, well, I really, and I was pleased to see Mark Becker, that I was on the same page with him, because he said that the Babylon kingdom during the Great Tribulation, he said Antichrist will locate his Babylon kingdom during the Great Tribulation, the land of Shinar. And that's what I think too. He said it appears that the Antichrist will rise from the area formerly known as the Seleucid kingdom. But again, the current Babylon in modern day Iraq is just ruins. But it does seem like if you study some of these Old Testament prophecies about the destruction of Babylon, they have not been fulfilled the way, from what currently happened in history. And so and to me it makes sense if you've got, like, the Antichrist is going to be in Israel setting up this image in their temple 3.5 years in. He's got to be in the area. I think it's like everything's kind of centering in the Middle East. I think he will have a rebuilt Babylon, that is what is destroyed in Revelation 18. And when people say, oh, that's America, we're going to be destroyed, in 1 hour. Well, number one, Babylon is a city. America is a country, and it's a city, the city of Babylon, that is destroyed in 1 hour in Revelation 18. But that also happens at the very end of the tribulation. And I think the United States is going to fall long before we get to that point.
I think they call New York City Babylon.
Yeah, so they say maybe just New York
The
City.
UN was there, and that's
Yeah.
the Statue of Liberty is really not what we think it is. It's a lot of things.
Yeah, I've heard that there's, some kind of, I can't remember now, some sort of satanic connection. And sometimes it's hard to know. I don't know. There's so much stuff that's said and that's out there. Sometimes it's hard to separate. I don't know enough about it to say one way or the other. But, Bo, did you want to say something?
Well, I think we have no idea really from the
Right.
prophecies, but something will have to come from the area of the Muslims in order to placate having the temple rebuilt and the dome missing. What will happen in order to cause it there? It could be some war or,
Right.
you know, bombing or what
Yeah.
could occur. And then I just think it's got to be someone who can temper the Muslim viewpoint to try to get everybody to still come together
Right.
and for this temple to be built. So,
Confirm a covenant with the many.
right. So, I mean, I think that there's got to be a play of some sort of something coming out of that region.
Yeah. I mean, I personally don't think any of these, you know, the Antichrist rise to power will happen without something very cataclysmic happening in our world. Whether, you know, it's some sort of nuclear thing that happens or just, you know, I mean, there's any number of things that could happen, but I think something severe will happen that will, you know, shake people up enough that they will, they will be looking for a, you know, the good guy to ride in on the white horse and save the day, and they will be deceived into thinking that the Antichrist is that person. So, but anyways, let's see, getting back to this. So, where are we on here? So, okay, so we have in the latter part of their reign, when the rebellion has reached its full measure. So, now mine says rebellion. Other translations say when the transgressors have reached their limit. And this seems like it could be referring to the tribulation period, because at that point you're going to have the whole world worshiping Satan and the Antichrist, and that's Revelation 13:4. And also Daniel 9:24, when he's talking about the 77s, it says, so 77s, this is an angel giving this to Daniel, are decreed for your people and your holy city to stop their transgression. So that same phraseology is used to stop the transgression. And, you know, and then when the transgression has reached its full measure in verse 23. So we'll go into that one more, excuse me, when we get to chapter 9. But then when it talked about a king of bold face, one who understands riddles, or an insolent king skilled in intrigue, which is my version. And then I went to Bible Hub, and you can like take the Bible verse and you can then click Hebrew or Greek, and it'll give you, I mean, since it was written in Hebrew, I clicked that. But the way it said for Hebrew, it said, a king fierce, having features, and who understands sinister schemes. So, you know, they're all kind of similar. It seems like an underhanded, like skilled in intrigue. I mean, somebody who's wheeling and dealing behind the scenes and doing all kinds of, you know, sinister schemes. I mean, stuff that's not good. And, you know, a fierce king, you know, so somebody, I don't know, maybe he seems kind of imposing or scary. Or maybe he just seems strong, you know, a king of bold face. You know, somebody who just, again, the world is going to be looking for a strong leader. So, and then so they talk about that. So we don't know Antiochus if he could have fit any of that or not, but his power will be great, but it will not be his own in verse 24. So now if we think about Antiochus, I mean, that's kind of like, well, he really wasn't that great as far as a king. You know, like Alexander the Great was great, you know, but Antiochus, did he really measure up to great, you know, being great? But the great power derived from another, let's flip back to Revelation 13, verses 1 and 2, because we see that the Antichrist gets his power directly from Satan. So then I saw a beast with 10 horns and 7 heads rising out of the sea. There were 10 royal crowns on its horns and blasphemous names on its heads. The beast I saw was like a leopard with the feet of a bear and the mouth of a lion. And recall, those were the 3 animals of the other kingdoms that we saw from chapter 7, which was, you know, Babylon, Medo-Persia, and Greece. And the dragon, who is Satan, gave the beast his power and his throne and great authority. So, you know, and some believe that the Satan will literally indwell the Antichrist, at least at some point during the tribulation. So his power is not something he gets from, you know, his power will be great, but it will not be his own because it's from Satan. So that's definitely sounding like the Antichrist. He will cause terrible destruction and succeed in whatever he does. Again, Antiochus did cause a lot of destruction as far as the Jews were concerned, but did he really succeed in everything that he did? I don't believe so, because I think he was trying to, take over Egypt, and that was a fail or something. I don't know, I have to go back and look, but I don't think he necessarily succeeded. And then it says he will destroy the mighty men along with the holy people. And again, we see, and I mean, you could say, well, that applied to Antiochus, but we also saw in Revelation 13 that in verse 7, then the beast was permitted to wage war against the saints and to conquer them, and it was given authority over every tribe and people and tongue and nation, and all who dwell on the earth will worship the beast. So, and then verse 25, through his craft and by his hand he will cause deceit to prosper, and in his own mind he will make himself great. That's actually like kind of almost comical. It's like just how egotistical we can be, and just how in our own minds we can think something when we're not. And so and like self-deception. So it sounds like, again, to me, that could have applied to either one. And then it says, in a time of peace, he will destroy many, and he will even stand against the prince of princes. So the time of peace, I mean, assuming it's, a lot of people say, well, the covenant is like a peace treaty, which it could be. It doesn't really say. It just says he will confirm a covenant with many. But you would assume that maybe there is, he's looking at the beginning like he's good, that Israel trusts him, and it's only 3.5 years in when he takes away their sacrifice and desecrates their temple, they realize they've been tricked. So, and then there will be massive amounts of destruction caused, like anybody who won't worship the Antichrist is killed. So, and he will even stand against the prince of princes, yet he will be broken off, but not by human hands. With Antiochus, like, okay, he died. Remember, he had that horrible illness where he was like being eaten by maggots when he was still alive and whatnot. So that was happening to him. And so you could say, well, he didn't die by human hands, like somebody didn't kill him. He had an illness. But the Antichrist definitely is killed by Jesus. Well, it says he's thrown alive into the lake of fire in chapter 19. And that's where, we didn't read this already, did we? Then I saw the beast and the kings of the earth with their armies assembled to wage war against the one seated on the horse and against his army. And that's Jesus and all the saints from heaven, because we're in chapter 19 and Jesus has come back. And I always thought, that was one thing that kind of didn't, I think this really hit me when we did the Revelation study, is that they're assembled to wage war against Jesus. And it's like, wow. So that's what they're there for. So that's where the Antichrist is clearly standing against the Prince of Princes, against Jesus Christ. But the beast was captured along with the false prophet, who on its behalf had performed signs deceiving those who had the mark of the beast and worshipped its image. Both the beast and false prophet were thrown alive into the fiery lake of burning sulfur, and the rest were killed with the sword that proceeded from the mouth of the one seated on the horse. So, when it says that he will stand against the prince of princes, yet he'll be broken off, but not by human hands, I mean, that's clearly fits with that passage. So then the angel goes on to say in verse 26, the vision of the evenings and mornings that has been spoken is true. So that's all he really says about it. He doesn't give anything further. But like I said, if we're tying all this in with the end times, then how does it fit into the tribulation? I think we kind of saw that already. And then he says, now you must seal up the vision, for it concerns the distant future. So basically, like, look, this is for much later. This really doesn't apply to you, Daniel, and you're not going to be able to understand this at this point. Because if you think about it, it's like 2,400 years later or something from when, he got this till now. And I'm probably a little off on the time, but approximately, even we're saying we don't quite know yet because we're not there. We're almost there, I think, with a lot of this stuff, but we're still trying to see how is all this going to play out. So then in verse 27, he says, I, Daniel, was exhausted and lay ill for days. Then I got up and went about the king's business. I was confounded by the vision. It was beyond understanding. So I think that that's an interesting point there, which is just that the consequences for rebellion against God are ultimately severe, and the revelation given by God caused extreme distress for Daniel. It was a lot for him to get this revelation, and he had like a similar reaction at the end of chapter 7 as well. In 7:28 he said that thus ends the matter. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts troubled me greatly and my face turned pale, but I kept the matter to myself. So these visions were tough on him, but one thing I did think was interesting is when we were on the earlier chapters of Daniel, I think when we were doing the Belshazzar chapter, it seemed like Belshazzar had not ever met Daniel from the context. It didn't seem like they knew each other. So we were like, was Daniel retired at this point? Because I think by that point he was like around 81 or so. But here it says he got up and went about the king's business. So he apparently was still doing stuff. Maybe he didn't actually interface with Belshazzar, but it seems like he was still doing things for the king, because this is the third year of Belshazzar. So I thought that was kind of interesting, because we didn't realize that before when we were talking about it. But
That's a good visualization. You have to put yourself right there and just visualize,
yeah.
how old was he?
Yes, yeah. Lois is saying you have to kind of like put yourself in the, visualize it, like, how old was he? And, yeah, like put yourself in the thing. Yeah, and that's what we try to do. And really, I'm so glad we're doing this study, because even though we've studied like bits and pieces of Daniel in the previous end time studies we've done, just doing it all like from start to finish has been really amazing. And I wanted to point this out, because like big picture, it's on the outline. So and we haven't actually covered the final chapters, but already kind of, I've been studying this for a while, so I kind of had an idea. But notice the pattern. So in chapter 7 of Daniel, we have the little horn, who is the Antichrist. Then now we have a little horn in Daniel 8, and it appears to be partially Antiochus, yet foreshadowing the future Antichrist of the tribulation, if not outright referring to the Antichrist. There's some are saying, well, this really doesn't fit Antiochus. It's a future thing that's going to be the Antichrist. So, okay, that's 7. Now 8, Antichrist. Daniel 9, 26 through 27, Antichrist. Chapters 10 through 12 are all part of the same narrative. So there really should all be, it could technically be one chapter. But Antiochus again makes an appearance in chapter 11, at least it appears that it's him. But again, the prophecy seems to go beyond Antiochus to the Antichrist, because the end of chapter 11 and all of chapter 12 seems clearly the end times. So I want to just read this, a little summary that they had in the Walvoord commentary, page 240. And it was actually not Walvoord. He was quoting a guy named Dwight Pentecost, which I'm like, well, that's a nice name for a Christian man. And but it says the key to understanding chapters 7 through 12 of Daniel's prophecy is to understand that Daniel is focusing his attention on this one great ruler and his kingdom, which will arise in the end time. So really the crux of the matter, even though he gives a lot of other historical predictions, it's really this Antichrist. And while Daniel may use historical reference and refer to events which to us may be fulfilled, Daniel is thinking of them only to give us more details about this final form of Gentile world power and its ruler who will reign on the earth. In Daniel chapter 8, we have another reference to this one. Daniel describes a king who is going to conquer the Medo-Persian Empire. This is a historical event that took place several centuries after Daniel lived. There was an individual that came out of the Grecian Empire who was a great enemy of the nation Israel. We know him as Antiochus Epiphanes. Antiochus Epiphanes was a ruler who sought to show his contempt for Palestine, the Jews, and the Jewish religion by going to the temple in Jerusalem with a sow or pig, which he slaughtered and put its blood upon the altar. This man was known as one who desolated, or, quote, the desolator. But this passage in Daniel 8 is speaking not only of Antiochus in his desolation and his desecration of the temple, it is looking forward to the great desolator who would come, the one who is called the little horn in Daniel 7. And in Daniel 8:23, we read of this one and his ministry. So like that final portion from 23 on was talking about the Antichrist. So that's really pretty much it. I kind of skipped over some of the stuff in here that was on the outline. We just kind of glossed over, but because I had some other biblical references, but I think we probably got most of that in. So comments, questions.
It's just interesting, yeah. Things line up.
Yeah. Lois says it's interesting how things line up.
You know, maybe not the exact, only God knows, you know,
Right.
the day and the time, but, you know, you can feel it,
You can
research it.
Yeah, you can kind of see it all starting to take form. Yeah. And I think, I think that, takeaway for me is just God is sovereign. God knows the beginning from the end. This stuff has already been prophesied about from thousands of years ago, and we can see it starting to take shape. We see, too, how Scripture interprets Scripture, with how Daniel correlates a lot with Revelation, but there's other places, too. And I think, the thing that weighs on me so much at this point in time is just the deception. There's so much deception right now, and it's only going to get worse as the tribulation goes on, and it's just heartbreaking because we don't want anyone to be deceived. Even taking the mark of the beast, that's like eternal damnation. Like, there's no coming back from it if you take the mark. And, and just people, just deceived into worshiping, or, they're going to, all these false miracles that are going to happen that will deceive people. And I think that the only way to guard against deception is to actually know what the Word is teaching. Because if we don't know what it's teaching and we don't understand all this, it just makes it so much easier to fall into deception. So we have to test everything against the Word. In order to do that, you kind of need to know the Word. And that's why we're studying the Bible, so we can understand.
Everything is in there.
Yeah, Lois said everything is in there. Right. God has given us what we need to know, but we don't actually need any new revelation. And that's where I think it's easy for people to get off on things, because if we have somebody coming out, oh, well, I have a new word or a new prophecy from God. The Bible clearly tells us test prophecies. You just don't accept it because the person said, oh, thus saith the Lord, blah, blah, blah. You don't just accept it. You have to, does it line up with the Word of God? And if it doesn't, if there's a contradiction there, if they're adding to the Word or teaching something that's clearly not even what it says, we have to reject that. And so it's, time's getting short, so we've got to be thinking about how to make the most of that time. And I'm speaking to myself, it's easy just to be complacent and just feel like, well, things will just keep going on as they are. And,
We have to try to make it better.
yeah, right. Yeah, so. All right, well, next week, we should be starting on Daniel chapter 9, which, again, like I said, that's one of the most fascinating prophecies in the Bible, I think, and just very, very, very cool how that all plays out. So anyways, thank y'all for joining in tonight, and happy 4th of July, and we will see y'all next time.